Today, I would like to actually do a very brief sermon that one can associate with Black History Month. And it is based upon one scripture found in the 27th chapter and the 32nd verse of Matthew. And as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compel to bear his cross. The black man and the cross. This scene is a scene of Jesus at the time of the crucifixion. The trial had been held. The night of agony and being sent from judgment hall to judgment hall had come and gone. And finally they had put Jesus out and had put a cross on his shoulder and were following the tradition of taking people outside of the city to crucify. Usually there was a person went out in front with a musical instrument, a harp, indicating that a person with a cross was following. And they would announce the person's name sometimes, and sometimes they would just have a big plaque with the person's name on it, announcing who was being crucified. So this is what was going on that day, and the people usually would stand in the crowds or stand along the side of the path where the person who was to be crucified was to pass carrying his cross. Because the people that day thought that Jesus might not live through this ordeal to be crucified, they decided to have someone else help him bear his cross. And they pulled from the crowd this black man, this Simon from Cyrene. Now, it is really not really absolutely factual that this man was even black. It is indicative that because of his name that he might have been Jewish. But he was from Africa, and that's why we think that he was probably black. And it's not that big of a deal. I'm simply saying he was black because he was from Africa. And I just want to make the point some things about Black History Month, so that's why it's called the Black Man and the Cross. But historically, you might research and come back and say, oh, Reverend Jenkins, that man was not really black. Well, maybe he wasn't. Okay, I can read also. But for our purpose here today, let's just say he was black. Okay? And so in this subject, the Black Man and the Cross, is chosen to make a point about Black History Month. So the man was from Africa, and the black folk in America the black folks who wound up in America came from Africa. So he's where you all are from, basically, regardless. And in fact, archaeologists say that life started in Africa, so in a sense we're all from Africa, if indeed they're true. They are accurate about all of us came from one human being, the first family that all of us came from there. So, but the point I want to make here is that this man, standing there in the crowd, watching the events, wound up being drawn into them. There he was, minding his own business, probably, and he just heard the noise and ran and got a part of the crowd. You ought to be careful what you run and jump into. So he ran and just want to see stuff. And the next thing you know, he had a cross. They said, come on, help him carry the cross. And there he was carrying the cross of Jesus. Minding his own business. Well, you know, one might say that black men in Africa, years and years and years later, 16 centuries later, were minding their own business, walking along the seashores out of the coast in Africa. And there was this ship showed up and grabbed them, threw them on them, and brought them back to America and dumped them into this land where Christianity was the main religion, even though it was all messed up in the way they were practicing it. So here again, you had this black man and the cross. So what I want to just talk about in a kind of lighthearted way, that in both of these instances, this man along the cross route that Jesus was taken, and these black men or black people in Africa were all involuntarily caught up in a great struggle of life. So here the black man on this route being compelled to help Jesus with his cross, and these black men in America, these black people in America being compelled to participate in the development of this country. You know, it's interesting. There is this poem by County Cullen that says, I doubt not God is good, well-meaning and kind, and did he stoop to quibble, could tell why the little buried mole born blind, and why flesh that mirrors him must someday die. And the sonnet ends by saying, yet do I marvel at this curious thing, to make a poet black and bid him sing. Now, when I read that poem, that sonnet, as a kid, and looked at it, and realized what it was saying, that a poet, that an artist, a singer has to sing songs of joy to a nation, songs of challenge to a nation, songs of hope to a nation. And it is most unfortunate to take people who have the greatest burdens that you could imagine bearing and saying to them, sing. By the rivers of Babel, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion, and they that carried us into captivity required of us a song. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Sometimes you are required to do some very, very unusual things in most awkward situations. So here is this black man. Here are these black people in America, in this so-called Christian nation, with the responsibility of helping the people become more Christian. Here were folks who were simply introduced to the idea, couldn't even read, and they were challenged with the responsibility to help the people who introduced them to the idea to develop the idea more fully. What is the cross of Christ? The cross is the responsibility or burden of having the reality of the will of God being done on earth. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The things that we dreamed of in heaven, the things that we mapped out in heaven, the thing that we wanted from heaven are to be accomplished in earth. That is the challenge of the cross. And those who take up the cross take up that challenge. So one of the challenges that the black man had in America, it was to help white people understand the all-encompassing reach of the cross. Now that is to say that to help white people white men understand the all-encompassing reach of the cross. You see, a lot of people don't know that the Jews, many of these things you read about the Jews in the Old Testament, the laws that the Jews had and the rules that the Jews had. Well, actually, what many people don't know as you read that is that those laws were for Jews. The Jews treated other Jews that way. The Ten Commandments were fine for the Jews. They treated other Jews that way. All of those laws in the first 5 books of the Bible, those are rules that Jews treated Jews with. One of the problems that the Jews had with Jesus is that he challenged them to extend those rules to mankind, to extend that love that you had for each other to mankind. So like the Jews, the white men in America, who were the original drafters of the Constitution, the original setting up of the laws and the guidelines for society, thought it was just fine for white men. But they did not see that as going beyond white men to white women even, and to black men, and to all of mankind. It was just something that they had a nice little thing going between them and God. You know, sometimes people like that today. They have a nice little thing going between them and God. Well, God, as long as you bless us, as long as you give us everything that we want, as long as you let us tell the world about how much you love us, and as long as you treat us like we are special, we'll be just fine. You see, you need to learn the difference between God's chosen people and God's favorite people. You see, just because you see they call the Jews God's chosen people. Well, I had problems with that when I was a kid. Because you see, I have all the ideas in my head have to get along with each other. I cannot believe anything that is in contradiction to the other stuff that I believe. So everything that I believe have to be in harmony or else I won't believe it. See, you want to put any thoughts. See, the thoughts in my head are powerful thoughts. And they fight weak and silly thoughts. And they fight any contradictory thought. So you cannot put any thought in my head that doesn't get along with the rest of them. You say, well, people can think what they want to. I can't. I can't think. I'm too intelligent to just think what I want to. I can think only those things that make sense with the rest of the stuff that I think. So when I was a kid, I heard that the Jews as God's chosen people. That didn't make sense to me. Because I don't want to serve a God that loves some folks more than he does others. But you see, I found through Revelation that there's a difference between being God's chosen people than being God's favorite people. You see, sometimes it's better being God's chosen people is not anything to run around and get excited about and brag about. You know, sometimes the folks who are not chosen I used to think sometimes, you know, if I didn't really understand stuff on the level I understand, I would really not like the fact that I was chosen. Because you see, I'm chosen by God to do certain things. I discovered recently that everybody gets a better deal from me than I get from me. Everybody else gets more out of me being me than I get out of being me. I'm chosen. It seems that I'm just chosen to help other people. Sometimes I get angry until I'm reminded that it could be the other way around. So I better thank God that I paid my brother's car notes for all last year rather than he paid mine. But you see, there's a difference between being chosen and being favored. So sometimes people are chosen to do something. That doesn't mean God loves them anymore. It means that God has placed upon them the responsibility to do something that they can do better than anybody else, because he gives them the ability and the opportunity to do it. So men in America were placed in a unique position. They might have been chosen just as the Jews were chosen, or might have been chosen. The men in America, the white men in America, might have been chosen to set up Christianity on this continent and expand it to the whole world. God knew back then that eventually we will have radio, and eventually we'll have television, eventually we'll have the internet, eventually we'll have TVN and those other religious station broadcasting systems that take the gospel all over the world. God knew back then that we'd eventually have that. And he might have been putting these people in place then to do what they can do now. God knew that. And maybe he started preparing black people to help white people expand their idea of God, so that when it became possible for this nation to stand as the best example of Christianity in the whole world, we would have our act together. You see, one of the things that black people did for America, and you say, oh, well, we prepared this country to have a black president. Well, that's really not the most important thing that black folk did for America. If black folk really did the things that they could do for America, it wouldn't make any difference what color the president was. What black folk did for America is to push America to get its house in order, so that we could serve as an example to the rest of the world. We wouldn't be able to talk to China about human rights. We wouldn't be able to talk to Iran about human rights. We wouldn't be able to talk to any nation about getting their moral and social house in order had we not gotten ours in order to the degree that we have. There wouldn't have been a human rights movement had it not been a civil rights movement. So the cross of the black man, the cross of Christ that was placed upon the black man, the cross of Christ that the black man had to help bear in America, was to help America see Jesus as something for the whole world and God as a God of mankind. Richard Allen, in their protest in the Methodist Church in starting the African Methodist Episcopal Church, was all a part of that, expanding people's idea of God. That's what this cross was about. Now, the cross also is about mercy and justice, or justice and mercy. One of the things that the black man challenged Americans to do is to have justice in this land. And what doeth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with him. You know, of all the things that black people have contributed to America, it might be that the greatest thing that we have done was to help this country expand its idea of God. To help this country be an all-inclusive country when it comes to religion and the love of God. And that has not been easy, because we've been very narrow-minded in our approach to God and church. But because of the insistence of black people, because of the agitation of black people, because of the constant protest of black people, we have expanded as a nation our idea of God and who God is concerned about. That God loves everybody. And that's part of this cross that we have to bear. You know, and then finally, I do want to close by telling you that God, or Jesus, has a little cross-bearing participation for every one of us, regardless of what color you are. God has a cross-bearing responsibility for you. You may be a student in school, you may be retired, you may be thinking that your life concerns stuff that is so different from this cross-bearing stuff. You may be minding your own business, just as I was, just as Simon was minding his own business, just caught up in the crowd and wanted to come and see what was going on. He's minding his own business. Just as these black people on the shores of the waters in Africa were minding their own business, and there they were caught up in a movement on the other side of the planet. I was minding my business in Mississippi, trying to be a baseball player, having dreams in my head of playing center field for the Dodgers and making a lot of money. They didn't make that much money then. I remember the first player to make $100,000, Willie Mays, and then Mickey Mantle. The first ones, and I thought, I'll make $100,000 because I'll be as good. And that's what I wanted to do. And then the days that I didn't want to do that, I wanted to be a great movie producer, so I would make up stories in my head and these manuscripts. And that's what I was going to do. I was minding my own business, chopping cotton in Mississippi, going to school and just thinking and minding my own business. Wanting to play ball in the afternoon and be a professional baseball player, minding my business. And I was called to preach and given the responsibility of helping Jesus carry this cross. Oh, it was a terrible thing to happen to a kid. I was just a child. I wanted to do whatever it is that boys were doing back then. But there I was called to preach. And I had the responsibility to take this cross. This man in the scriptures was compelled to bear the cross, but it doesn't say he complained. He bore the cross and I bore the cross. I preached. I stood up for justice. I spoke out against injustice. I tried to look after the vulnerable people in society. I did all of those things, carrying that cross. And I have something to tell young people about the cross. I used to hear older people say in the church, I wouldn't take nothing for my journey now. Well, as unfair as I thought it was to be called to preach at such an early age, as unfair as I thought it was to give up my shot at playing Major League Baseball, as unfair as I thought it was not to be allowed to do the thing that other boys 16 and 17 and 18 years old were doing, which is when I started preaching. My first sermon is 18. I thought it was so unfair that I was pulled out of that carefree life and charged to preach the gospel. I will tell you today that it has been the most beautiful thing of my life. That there is nothing that I could have done that would have been better, more joyous, more rewarding than what I have done. Well, how do I know? I have seen the people who have done it differently. And over the years, one by one, I have seen that my choice was better, that my cross was more joyous than their pleasures. And even then, one day, my cross will be transformed into a crown.